Okay, good afternoon, good afternoon. Welcome. Thank you all for coming. It's my pleasure to welcome two artists today that have worked together for over 20 years. Bryndis Snæbjörnsdóttir, Professor of Fine Art at the Iceland University of the Arts in Reykjavik, and Mark Wilson, Professor of Fine Art at the Institute of the Arts at the University of Cumbria. So welcome to you both. Since the 90s and the emergence of what has been termed the institutional critique, art has moved into expanded fields with critical art strategies being consciously mapped onto different disciplines. Interdisciplinary work is not only happening, but is now strongly encouraged. In the UK, for the first time in our next research exercise 2021, there will be a specialist interdisciplinary panel members tasked with assessing work that falls across one or more units of assessment. Also, of late, the model of the individual artist working in isolation has been called into question, and collaborative practice is not only understood, but acknowledged and respected as a productive methodology. With these two artists, Bryndis and Mark, all three of these areas come together. An expanded practice, interdisciplinary research, working in animal studies, human geography, museology and the environmental sciences, and also a 20-year collaboration that embraces Brian Gissin and William Burroughs' belief that when you put two minds together, there is always a third mind, a third and superior mind as an unseen collaborator. As the former member of Art and Language, Terry Atkinson, put it, the problems in art will be best examined through a collective inquiry. And then there's their subject matter, which tackles questions bigger than art and couldn't be of more relevance to us all as humans living on a small blue planet that weighs 5.9 sextillion tons and is travelling through space at 1,000 miles per hour. The very real threat of a mass extinction event. In their practice, they skillfully demonstrate that contemporary art has a very real and significant voice in these debates that could affect, increasingly, urgent cultural and behavioural change. Please join me in extending a very warm Yorkshire welcome to the very brilliant Bryndis Snæbjörnsdóttir and Mark Wilson.
Thank you very much, Simon. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah? So very, very pleased to be here. Very honoured to be here. And this is supposed to be working, actually. Let's just get this going. Okay, yeah. So...
and thanks to Simon.
Thanks to Simon, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, from the university. So the animation you see here, actually, I suppose, yeah, just to repeat a little bit what Simon said. I mean, we have been working together for this length of time. It's an evolution, you know, the process of coming together around common interests and developing work based on those common interests is to some extent strategic and to some extent, you know, it's within our control. There are other aspects of it which are completely without our control. Work pops up, people ask us to do things, and if it looks good, we will go to those places. And so there's a kind of an evolution which is beyond us, really, and beyond our anticipation. So that it's always quite an adventure. Do you want to say anything?
No, I haven't got my mic on, but I was just going to say that, yeah, okay, I have it here. I was just going to say that the way we are going to be doing this, because it's obviously when you're a collaborative team and when you're being invited to go and do a talk like this, there's a limited time. And I'm very conscious of my English and my inability to articulate matters in the sort of concise and, you know, kind of correct way. So what we're going to be doing is that Mark is going to be doing the majority of this, but so you just kind of get my voice and my angle, and that I'm actually here. I'm going to come in a little bit later and talk about a project that we sort of started this whole thing. So I'm going to be at the site for a while.
See you later.
Yeah.
Okay. So the animation you see here is entitled The Poster Children, and it's by the artist Marina Zirkov, 2007. The work was featured along with our own project, Nanook, Flat Out and Bluesome, in an essay entitled The Silence of the Polar Bears, performing Climate Change in the Theatre of Species by Una Chaudhary for the Palgrave Macmillan publication, Readings in Performance and Ecology, of 2012. So both our projects, both Nanook and this piece, in very different ways, explored and critique the limitations of representation, textual or otherwise, in the presentation of complex ideas in history and in the present. The work's called, The Poster Children. So in the talk, we'll be coming to that in a little while, the NANOC project. It's an old project. It's one that, in a sense, rooted and sort of consolidated our collaborative partnership. And I had the impression that we were invited to talk quite a bit about that project. The interesting thing is that, so I'll do that, but the other thing is that you'll also see a developing thread in more recent projects where we are continuing to work in the Arctic on some related issues. So I'll talk you through that, or we will. These are the points I've picked out from the abstract that I sent Simon, and that you'll have seen, hopefully. And in some ways, small or big, we'll be sort of discussing these either by implication or directly. So site specificity, obscure venues, original methods and cross-disciplinary appropriation. I should remind myself of them. The most promising platform, the most likely instrument, being art, of course. Extending discourse between ideological strangers, the idea of the only show in town, the context of crisis, the tool of disruption and mediation, again, art, and passivity as weapon. Okay, so within the context of crisis, of mass extinction, the Anthropocene, global warming, and so on, we consider and practice art as a tool of disruption and mediation. At the same time, we question how passivity is a weapon towards societal behavioural recalibration, and how complex cross-disciplinary relationships can effectively and otherwise be productively managed. The word passivity is something that I've kind of, we sort of touched on, and it probably means a lot of different things to different people. I'll come to that. How can passivity be, or be made to be, purposeful, or a form of resistance? And we do need resistance. Passivity, in the sense intended here, is a concept that in art brings multiple perspectives into a presentable form, a line of sight by which we examine how conditions and materiality coalesce, bringing situations into being. How such situations are constituted and exist in fluid complexity in time and space. Passivity is anti-militancy, anti-evangelistic, anti-iconic. But what is not made conspicuously visible in a way by which it can be named appears in another way, obscure, paradoxically beyond identification, and remaining hard to notice. A condition compounded by the vicissitudes of mutability, change, is the one thing by which all conditions, elements in one way or another, all conditional elements in one way or another, at one pace or another, are related and equally diverge. So such work might appear obscurantist, contrarily obtuse. Is this a deliberately and self-destructive dissolution of possible effect? In other words, do we, by taking this idea that you actually resist the idea of the iconic, the soundbite, the sort of instantly recognizable icon or image, that's the sort of the currency of the media, in a sense. By resisting that, and actually by inviting, addressing, and incorporating complexity, and not trying to simplify it. Is it like shooting ourselves in the foot? That's the question that a lot of artists have to ask. Or can passivity, the strategy to favour complexity over the iconic or simplistic, be redeemed in a reframing toward purpose? Will it inevitably mobilise irony in presenting a levelling of antithetical moral positions? Ought we to know from the outset what that purpose might be? Is it just a nudge or a spur, really, toward behavioural change? And consequential slowing down to accommodate an ever-shifting kaleidoscopic view, thereby prompting a measured relational sensibility over one otherwise insistent on a jumpy semiology of fixed abbreviations. And that idea of the idea of slowing down is an interesting one that some of you may have thought about, or when reading things like the cosmopolitical it's Isabel Stenger's cosmopolitical proposal, where she talks about the idiot and the function of the idiot and the absurd as a strategy for rethinking how we address the world. Don't worry, I'm not going to read the whole time. So we are talking about semiotics, yes, but how art disrupts our addiction to semiotics. Fudging disciplinary boundaries, the matrix of lenses by which we consider our multiply constituted subject, in turn, will tend to deepen and extend this complexity. So by working across disciplines, working with people outside of the field of contemporary art, and involving them in the processes of making and thinking about subjects, again, complicates it in the way that Simon alluded to just before. And it demands a slower, more worldly, that is, knowing and sophisticated engagement. In discussing the trope of artists' placements in societies of the other, in an essay called Other People's Cultures, Pavel Buchler rightly cautions that the more we, that is, artists, overlap in our work with the practices of other fields, the more we trespass on others' territories, the clearer and more specific we need to be about our specialist identities and roles to get away with it. In other words, to make them function, to make it give it purpose, or to maintain that purpose. So here also we're thinking, about the strategies of determinant, in the sort of Guy Debord sense, which is an artistic form of culture jamming, and he says re-radicalizes semiotic guerrilla warfare. No, re-radicalizes previous critical conclusions that have been petrified into respectable truths and thus transformed into lies. This is the work of art. I'll just read a little bit more. Artists, Buchler says, are in their behavior generalists and have different motivations from those specialists in other fields. But it is their responsibility to pay more than close attention to the specificity of their processes and presentations. And in presenting a richness of material in the form of propositional, non-directional, associative tangentials in art, there is an inevitable liberating effect as we track between conditions, objects, and relations, rather than simply words. Words are simply one more material for an artist, and in turning to art, we allow ourselves, artists and audiences alike, to be cut adrift from the tyranny of unitary symbolism. Nearly finished. For us, in considering how we use and abuse representation, particularly through images, we reference the inflated expectations and reliance we as a culture have on images and make a rationale for multi-stranded and interstitial constructs as mechanisms by which to draw meaning from the particular rather than the generic. So this is key to what we do in a lot of the work that we make. So focusing on the particular rather than generic. Increasingly, images on their own provide us with a flattering reflective screen rather than any route to understanding phenomena or experience. This is because our understanding is diverted by images rather than enabled. Unmediated images, that is, images untroubled by other strands and inflections, suggest independence of subject and closed narrative. Destinations rather than the way. Icons rather than relations. And now more than ever, in times of environmental crisis, we need to think, image and imagine relationally rather than in the misleading terms of finite meaning. Okay. So that's my, hopefully, setting the stage in a sense. And we're now going to introduce the project I spoke about.
Okay, so you hear me okay? Yeah. So I just wanted to start by introducing a little bit how we came to work in the way we've been working, and that is with this particular project that Mark mentioned, this nano flat-out inclusion. But basically, I've been living in Glasgow, and I was there for quite a few years. 15 years I lived in Glasgow, and there was a time there in the late 90s, early 2000, that I was working on an exhibition with a group of Glasgow artists, which was actually partly one part of it was in Reykjavik and the Living Art Museum in Reykjavik. Some of you may have heard of that institution. And the other one was in the CCA in Glasgow. And this group of artists in Glasgow, they decided that for this show in Glasgow, what we should all be focusing on and what was going to be the sort of common denominator of us there together would be something to do with ourselves in Glasgow, in the context of Glasgow. And for me, the first thing I thought about was my name. my surname. You heard Simon say it so beautifully here today, but it doesn't always happen like that. And I, for some reason, and I was being also a bit critical of myself, I had been very militant about getting people to try and say this name correctly, Snæbjörnsdóttir, yeah. And it was endlessly, it kind of, I guess this sort of started as a bit of an, identity inquiry or something, because, all the time in Glasgow, wherever I went, it didn't matter, it was those days when you had a checkbook and you went to a supermarket and you just put in your name on the check and you show your card, and people would start this communication about my name. In the bank, they would start the same, and in the taxi, so it's always about my name. And so I started to think like, well, actually, what does my name really mean? I mean, of course, I knew that, but my name, if you split it up into Snæ, meaning snow, and Björn, meaning bear, and Dóttir, meaning daughter of, you got this kind of daughter of the snow bear, or, and so I made that like the daughter of the polar bear, the snow bear being the polar bear, although it's not exactly in Icelandic. Polar bear is Ísbjörn and not Snowbjörn, yeah, or Snæbjörn. So so I decided, and this is part of this exhibition in the CCA in Glasgow, this work that I did there. But wait a minute, is it here? So I decided that to sort of start the framing of this work was that I was going to photograph what I remembered being two huge polar bears in the Kelvin Grove Museum in Glasgow. And I called, of course, up the museum and, asked if I could kind of go there because, I wanted to go there with my big camera and my tripod and everything, my Mamiya 6x7 I was very proud of that camera. And they said to me, oh, unfortunately, we don't have the polar bears on display anymore. There's a new policy in the Kelvin Grove Museum, and that is we only show animals indigenous to Scotland. And this made me, of course, I thought, wow, this is just right, I'm right in here. So I said, but where are they? And they said, well, we've got all the stuffed animals in the basement of the Transport Museum, which is across the road, but you're welcome to go into the Transport Museum with your camera, which I did. And these are the two polar bears that I saw there. But before coming to these polar bears, I had to move all these other animals away. And this was like a huge bus full of stuffed animals from all over the world. And it was so overpowering to me, even first of all, the whole question about like, what's going on here? I mean, we've just gone out into the world and just killed all these animals, and now we just don't want to have them anymore, and we should shuffle them into the basement and close the door off. So I was kind of interested in what's going on with this and just sort of ethical questions. And the other thing was, when I was pushing all these other animals away to get with my camera to the polar bears, I was touching skins of animals that I'd never come close to, and it really impacted on me. And I also thought about being from Iceland and that time in Iceland. I mean, if you've been to Reykjavik today, the Reykjavik that I left in the mid-80s was totally different. And I grew up with there was a tiny zoological kind of museum which had a couple of sheep and then just fish. So I had not seen anything like this in my life. So I'm just trying to get you to understand why it sort of impacted so massively on me. And in that, I just thought, I'm going to find them all. I am going to have a project where I find every single stuffed polar bear in the United Kingdom, and I am just going to somehow, just do something about this. I didn't quite know what, but I had the drive and I had the desire. Yeah. And that's how this project started. And then I had actually Mark and I had begun sort of our collaboration, and Mark came with me into this project from this kind of really early stage in the project. And being in that sort of dialogue with someone, here I was with my kind of passion and sort of personal kind of reasons, if you can say so. But Mark, and being in the dialogue with Mark, opened up so many other things that this project could become. And that's also sort of part of how we, I think, in a sense, been able to see the value in this kind of dialogical position that collaboration offers. So, so this project, what we called Nano Flat Out of Bluesome, began as a survey of displaced taxidermic polar bears in the United Kingdom. It was conceived with a view to restoring specific and discrete histories to relics whose purpose had hitherto been generic and symbolic. So you know that the polar bear or any other animal in a zoology collection, it stands there to represent all the other animals of its same kind. So what we were trying to think immediately there is, but what about that particular animal? You know, that's an individual, it's a being. And so we're kind of trying to get to that. And of particular influence on us during the project's conception was an exhibition, which I'm not sure that many of you may have seen, but you may have heard about it or read about it in a catalogue. It was called Private View. And it was curated by Penelope Curtis and White Gurner and was in the Bose Museum. It was just a collection of French decorative arts. Does anyone know this exhibition? And so it had been sensitively and provocatively interspersed with the contemporary artworks, including examples by Thomas Greenfield, Damien Hirst, and Anya Galaccio. And we had a rather special experience, as Mark and me, of this exhibition as we viewed it whilst the finishing touches were being put in place and before the exhibits were labelled. And within this distinctive and often bizarre historical collection, this meant that there was a compelling uncertainty as to which exhibits were the temporary inquisitors and which were the hosts. So it's a kind of like, because the collection was so, if you can say, bizarre, then with the artworks in amongst them, what we really enjoyed was the whole thing, like really just thinking where the art was, where it began and where it ended. So this is just a poster for an exhibition that we had in Spike Island in 2004. So yeah, I don't know. I'll maybe read a little bit. I mean, this is from. So basically, what we did was to go all around. Well, we had this kind of book, it's called the Museum Yearbook, and we basically sat by the phone and phoned every single museum that had a zoology collection, asking them if they had the polar bear in their collection. And we had this, you know, this is like 2000, and if you think about it, in 2000, majority of the museums did not have a computer. And many of them didn't quite know what they had in the collection as such, yeah. And so, you know, so we basically, we gathered this archive, and it was like an orange box we had with cards, and there was this, we had all the museums kind of up there, and then it was like yes and no, and if they had the polar bear, we would then put it down on the map and organize to go to the respective place to photograph. Yeah, I'm just going to read a little bit here. The significance of Nana Clottotum Bluesum hinges fundamentally on the conception of displacement. Initially and specifically in the displacement of polar bears from their natural environments in various parts of the Arctic region and into municipal and private collection. The initial acts of appropriation brought them as living creatures into zoos and as skins, and thereafter as taxidermic specimens into museums. More generally, Nanak examines the simple act of displacement of material from one place to another, in the form of trophies, souvenirs, or objects of curiosity, as proof of a world beyond one's own, which act, depending both on intention and interpretation, transforms those who appropriate into colonial thieves, mercenaries, conquering heroes, philanthropists, or cultural benefactors. So maybe I should say a little bit about, you know, this, you know, so we photographed, we had this, and Mark was talking about this kind of passivity in the beginning, and, you know, one of the things that I think is important to talk about is that we deliberately did not want to take the perfect image. We set out with a camera, which was this Mamiya 6x7. This is just at the beginning of the digital as well. And so basically there was a whole lot of time which was taken into setting up in the museum. And in the museum, when you bring a tripod and it takes us a long time, you have to get all the permissions in place. So we also used the, maybe I can go on to the next image when I'm talking about this. We also used the time that this gave us to kind of, if you can say, befriend the museum people, because we wanted to ask them if they would lend us polar bears at another stage within the project. Yeah. So there, this kind of camera and this old-fashioned technique, I mean, now today you would probably go in there and there'd be no problem taking as many photographs as you wanted, and you would find the one that was the best, and you'd go into the Photoshop and you'd kind of get it in the way you wanted it to be. But for us, we really wanted to change as little as possible. And so we photographed with a film, which was the one that could cope with as much variety of light as possible. So we had the same lens, the same film, the same camera, for every single shoot. Yeah? And what we were trying to do, and this lens was, the lens is closest to what the eye sees. So what we were really trying to do was to kind of somehow set ourselves this kind of limit that we wouldn't go into. What we so often do with photography is to kind of try and correct or change the world a bit. Yeah? So this is basically in the Maritime Museum in Peterhead. And this particular polar bear, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about these images that we took when we went to go to these locations. And this particular, the museum was being restored, and so that's why there is a cloth on this other animal there, and it was just kind of in a bit of a sort of a state. It was not open to the public, but as with everything, we just took the image as it was. And then this one was in Worcester. And Worcester Museum, and basically they took the lid off, and this is how it was stored. And it's kind of a pride of, they're very proud of this little specimen that they had. And in the information that we found out, the provenances that we found out, because what we did was that we would ask at the same time as we went to photograph, we kind of got the zoologist into working with us and trying to find out as much as was possible with each specimen. And sometimes this would be really difficult because often the information about the specimen was on the plinth that the specimen had been on. And then they often changed the plinth when they moved them from one exhibition to another. So all this information were kind of lost. So this project, without us intending to, it got this kind of other machine going within the museum where the zoologists were actually, and they became really interested in the project because they could see that this was of importance to their collection to have the history of their their specimens. But so these photographs that I'm showing here, displayed at various museums and printed in a beautiful book about the project, are exemplary documents of what might be called zoo geopathology, the infliction by humans on the other animal, of the vicissitudes of displacement. Living through these brilliant photographs is like journeying through the very definition of the uncanny in its etymological sense of unhomelike, the oddly estranged, the strangely out of place. And this is something that Una Chowdhury, who Mark quoted earlier in the beginning, she actually wrote in her book, so I'm just quoting her. And this one, it was in the Museum of Childhood in Halifax. Maybe some of you have seen this one, but I mean, this is actually, the only one that we sort of kind of changed a little bit, because there was a very interesting story to do with this one. We found out was it in Leeds?
Yes. We
found out in Leeds, actually, that there was a polar bear in the museum in Halifax, in isn't it called Eureka? The Museum of Childhood in Halifax. And we called them up and sort of said if we could photograph the polar bears that was in their collection. And the director at the time, he just said they didn't have a polar bear. And we were having this conversation where I'm so saying, well, I'm afraid you do have a polar bear. And he's like, no, we don't have a polar bear. Is this an April Fool's Day or something, you know? And but the thing was that it was part of this loft attic junk display. And so this rug that you see there, in this Persian rug, it was actually pulled right over, and it was only the nose that was visible. And so, and because they couldn't just go on the computer and just like polar bear, where he said, you know, he just didn't know it was there. And so when we went to photograph it, we just pulled that rug a little bit back. And and this is another one. This is the oldest one we found. This is just a skin which is stuffed over a wooden armature, and children had been playing with it and sitting on it, and it's in Fife Castle in Scotland. A typical setting from which the specimens were sourced was a tableau of stolen exotica, the subtext of which is colonial conquest. It is rare in such a display for any direct allusion to the provenance of the specimen to be present. It is this characteristics, cultural omission, which prompted us to reintroduce the work back into zoological collections in order to identify and interrogate the presumptions and taxonomic behavior traditionally at work in such institutions. As bastions of knowledge and public education, museums have been profoundly influential on collective readings of the world. The principle of the art intervention was as simple as it was quietly ambitious. Having attracted the viewer's attention and driven a wedge under the foundation of classification by using something as iconic as an ice bear, it would have the potential at least to destabilize everything within that context, or at least render open for review the taxonomic subject across multiple fields within the museum. And I'll come to that later, how we can place them into the museum collection, because that's what always our intention with this work was, to go back into the institution, was to go back with them, to question the collection itself. And then this one is in Dublin, and and also caused massive research by I think it was Neil Monaghan, who was the zoologist in Dublin, because he didn't have the he had some letters but didn't have the history. And actually transpired that this polar bear was shot on this expedition in 1857. This ill-fated expedition of John Franklin to discover the Northwest Passage. Is that right?
Well, yeah, that expedition was the expedition that finally found him after at least 9 years. I think he'd been lost. John Franklin had been lost looking for the Northwest Passage.
Okay. So, and another one, this was in a home in Somerset, and it was formerly in the offices of Glacier Mint, but it was a 21st birthday present from someone to his, it was from the sister of the owner, and he was just standing there in the hall of this house. And then we have the two polar bears that were in Somerlater Hall in Norfolk. And what's interesting about them is that they're kind of stuffed or taxidermized in a position where they're sort of like the one, on that side is like this, and the other side of the door is like that. And so they kind of, you enter through the door with these two polar bears. And actually the Lord Somerleyton, who actually turned out to be a really helpful person to this project and really interesting, and was very much aware of what is then and what was now. But it was his great-grandfather who had actually shot these two bears on an expedition that he went to Spitsbergen in 1897, where they actually shot 55 polar bears, believe it or not. And he brought something to the project which we then published in the book in forms of slides, and I think we will come to that a little bit later. So this, we actually did, in terms of the photographs, they went back into the museum in two different ways. There was either this kind of format, which is about 70 times 60, and there we always had these kind of text, we call it these kind of provenances, which we'd kind of taken from all the information that we'd gathered. And so with every image was the image of the bear, and then a kind of text, which in a sense gave a sense of why it was what it was, how it had come to be in the museum. And then the other way was doing it in these really large format images, and they were in these kind of quite solid frames. We thought about them because many of these zoology collections in this museum are kind of Victorian in their kind of interior. So we were kind of trying to work with some of that, and then had these big, as I said, solid wood frames, and with these brass plates where they were kind of engraved into the bottom of the image, similar to what you see in many kind of paintings have been gifted to the museum. And then this other part to this project was, as I said, a little bit about this, borrowing these bears for an exhibition. And then when we started to come to the museum, I was kind of somewhere easier than others, and it was an amazing process, because very often they were being dragged out from storages, they were in terrible state, and in a sense the project got the museums to kind of clean up their specimens and repair various things like claws and ears and things that had kind of fallen off because they'd just been kind of put into store. And this is in Newcastle, and so in which they they took the bear out of a display there, but they just dragged it out into the courtyard, and they weren't being that sensitive, if you can say so, during the time, because they just had these huge air guns, and they blasted it, and all the dust and everything just for everywhere. And that's an image from that. And also what was kind of interesting I have to say, Mark really likes this. It's really, what it actually does show, it's kind of a bit difficult to see it, isn't it? But this is actually showing you the hole in the body of the stuffed animal. So if you actually looked carefully, you could see that they aren't just living beings, because there was actually a bullet hole in the skin, and within was straw. And so it actually had just been stuffed up with straw. It was something they did in very early specimens, and they would even then have the skeleton, also the real skeleton, and then it was just like straw or some metal armatures. And this is the polar bear coming out from Somerleyton Hall, and it was interesting when this one, when we came and got this one. Lord Somerleyton told us many stories about how he had enjoyed both scaring his visitors by basically putting polar bear in bed, and then after dinner, when they came to bed, there was a polar bear lying in the bed and things like that. And then he told us he'd actually washed them many times by just putting them out into the courtyard, and then getting soap and brush and just kind of cleaning them all up. But then when we borrowed them for our project, and this was part of this, when we borrowed these 10 polar bears, that it became really expensive, because everything had to be handled like art. So there was like the white glove treatment, and suddenly, they were coming out there. There were art handlers who were kind of bringing them out and, crating them. And there was one interesting incident that happened with this, when the removal men were putting them into the van where they crated it, because they couldn't take the crate outside of the hall. One of them stood up, and the polar bear just scratched into its skull, and there's blood was leaking down. So the claws are really, really, really sharp of the ones in the wild. And this is just from us installing them in Spike Island. And we just wanted to have this image, because later on Lord Somerleyton helped a lot lending his polar bears, because often when the work would travel, museums wanted to show a polar bear, and they didn't necessarily have a polar bear in their collection. But Lord Somerleyton had an ambition, and this was why he wanted to lend his bear all the time. And his ambition was to prove that he had the tallest polar bear in the United Kingdom. And it is kind of interesting what people get into. And this is actually from the exhibition. And so then in 2004, when the 10 polar bear specimens were purposely displaced again for the eponymous installation in Spike Island in Bristol, their mutual effect upon each other was simultaneously to cancel out their representational and iconic currency and render visible as counterfeit the promises they'd been called upon to convey. Through this second displacement, both physically and photographically, in the services of art, the artist tested how prevailing taxonomies and hierarchies in Western thought, as presented in museum and private collection, could be productively disrupted as a way of imagining a more network constitution of this specific material. And basically, so we displayed them without any information. We took everything away, and it was just these polar bears there. And we thought a lot about how people would move through the space and how we would turn the polar bears and how you would actually come to see each one when you walked through the space. We had to put all of them into these displays boxes, which came. These were one of the things that the museum demanded or required, because they were suddenly, although they had been in this state and although they've been in their storages and in rather bad conditions, they were very valuable when we borrowed them. And so they had to be frozen before we got them, and they had to be handled and crated as art objects, and they had to be put into museum display cases, and then they had to be frozen again before they went back to the collections. And then some of them, were kind of quite iconic within their own kind of museum. So this is from Sheffield. And this polar bear used to be in Edinburgh Zoo, and they died in the 70s. And what's interesting about this polar bear is that, and amongst the one in the exhibition, it has a very different pose to many of the earlier, older one. And we can sort of see, by looking at the taxidermy of these specimens, our relationship and ideas of this animal. We can of course see how taxidermy has evolved, but we can also see the change in our attitude towards them, be they right or wrong. So basically in the 19th century and the early 20th, the polar bear was always displayed as something that demonstrated some kind of you'd conquered something, or the strength of man, or something. It was this strong, big animal. Whereas in the 70s, they're being stuffed more like playful, friendly, beings. So, and that was one of them. And this bear was initially called Jim, but when it died, it transpired that it wasn't a male, it was a female. And then it was called Janie. And then the museum underwent refurbishment in Sheffield, and they've renamed it Snowy. It's there today, as far as I know. This is the one at the back of the one that we see from Liverpool, and that one was all done up specifically for this project. And in the background, you see a little bit a seating area that we had in the back of the exhibition space, and I'll come to that a bit later. And we had George McInnes, who's a taxidermist, who'd actually came and he looked at all the specimens, and he sort of notified any kind of anything that was wrong with them, or so. And one thing was to kind of make sure that we didn't damage anything, and the museum knew that they were being taken care of. But the other thing he did was that he did, for all the invigilators of the show, he did like a sort of short course in taxidermy, in terms of not how to stuff, but talking about the method, and also talking a little bit about the sort of anatomy, and pointing to the different of lack of knowledge in some of the specimens, where you could basically see that anatomically they couldn't, that wasn't right, the way they had been stuffed. And then we have this one image here of a claw, because it was amazing what the public took from this exhibition. When the exhibition was in Bristol, this was the coldest February in Bristol for 100 years or something. It actually snowed on the opening night of the exhibition. It was almost like magical. And the gallery organized that every day someone from the public came and just talked about their ideas relating to the North. And so there's a lot of activity going on at the same time, but often people would just come and sit in there and just think. I mean, it was a really kind of powerful thing to be confronted with 10 polar bear specimens. And so suddenly you just realized that this wasn't just the one thing that represented all the others. And one of the things that people often could see was that if the claws were like this one on the image, filed down, you could see that this had been a captive animal. And so people were able to draw out certain things from some little that we gave. We also had this map. This was really as one wall. We had this map. And this was a reference to Tony Cragg's Britain seen from the north. And so basically we turned it upside down. And there we had kind of marked in with dots the polar bears that we had kind of found. And there was a tiny text on the cities relating to that. And this is from the conference that we had. We had the one-day conference called Whiteout. It was on top of the gallery, what the gallery organized, and we tried to bring into this as many issues surrounding the exhibition as possible, like museology and display, taxidermy, photography, the colonial impulse on Arctic exploration, the whaling industry, subsistence and trophy hunting, and shifting attitudes towards the environment. These were all discussed in this conference. And then I just wanted to, this is kind of this seating area at the back. And you know, we had got this sponsorship from an Icelandic wool company. And we had these blankets. They gave these blankets, these sort of whitish blankets. And because it was really cold in the gallery, it was quite interesting sometimes, and we don't have an image here of it, but people were sitting there wrapped up in these blankets. And then you had these kind of polar bears, and there was something kind of similar in these kind of images of these two beings. But, well, you can question, they were obviously gone. I think Marky wanted to take over now.
That's the film, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, and down underneath that ziggurat you just saw that we had built, there was back projection inside it. You can go and have a look at this film. I'm not going to show you the film, but I might show you just an extract to see, so you can see what was going on. And really, that was just, you know, we've always been interested in the idea of actually making the process of the work that we do very visible. You know, so it's not just like just a thing at the end. It's actually the process of how things come into being has been very important to us, I think, and remains that way. So it's not like a sort of, you know, it declares itself as an important factor of the work itself. I guess it's just trusting in the idea of research, really. So basically, the film tracks the removal of bears from their collections. Oh, that's okay. And basically, it tracks actually the following of the removal of 3 bears from their either private or museological spaces. Okay, and the cleaning and so on. So that was on show, so people could see that and see how this thing, you know, them being created and stuff. So and then they all arrived, and all the crates arrived in Spike Island, and this was sort of setting them up. And George McInnes was there, you know, doing his note taking and stuff, and being general sort of all round custodian of the integrity of animal specimens. And there they go into these custom built crates. And so on. So you see how that works. This is actually online, this film, if anyone's interested. It's quite interesting because the film finishes with this, you know, the photographing of this bear, the Sheffield bear, and it's like a sort of fashion model or something. You know, it's all these sort of bulbs going off and stuff, and it's like it's just a very fitting end, you know. Not that it has anything to do with anything other than it's just, you know, I guess it references the idea of, you know, taking one thing out of context and making a spectacle of it. There's no question about it that Nanok at Spike Island was a spectacle. I mean, it was spectacular, you know, but it was much more than that. And I think what we tried to do was manage those things so that, in a sense, importantly, the bears were a context for each other. So it was a very unusual thing. You weren't seeing one specimen which was representative of all specimens. They all sort of cancelled each other out at the same time as, in a sense, informing each other. So it was, even that was that, just as, you know, in the case of most of the things we were trying to do, was a complication. It was a complication of a making complex of this supposedly iconic figure. So there's a publication of that which has all the documentation of the exhibition, but also the research that went into it. And so that was, and also it has essay contributions from the speakers who spoke at that Whiteout conference. We had Steve Baker, who wrote The Postmodern Animal, and Gary Marvin, who wrote Bullfight, and anthropologist. We had a Latvian guy who'd actually hunted with Inuit people in Greenland, and he was actually married to someone from that community of Kakatok. And for about 15 years, I think he'd been up there doing the subsistence hunting further north than that. And then Michelle Henning, who talked about the relationship between photography and taxidermy, which is a really fascinating relationship once you start to think about it. So she writes a very eloquent essay in that publication. So these were the slides that Bryndis talked about. When Summer Leighton found we were coming to photograph his polar bear, he thought, he thought about the fact that his grandfather had shot these on this shooting spree in 1897. Left most of them on the shoreline. You know, just they used to shoot them from the deck of ships just for target practice. But they brought 5 back. I think 2 skins, and no, maybe 4 back. One was a cub, and which ended up in Regent's Park Zoo, and then there was, I can't remember how many skins. And then at least the 2 that you know of. Yeah, there were 3. There's one in Norwich Museum as well. So 3 ended up being stuffed and put into museum or private collections. But anyway, he remembered that he had these slides. These slides had never been published before, okay? And so he said, oh yeah, well, when you were coming down, I thought I'd dig these out. So he got up into his enormous sort of attic in the, you know, like, everyone thinks about it, like, this was an enormous attic in this baronial hall. And he comes down with these dusty old slides in a very sort of like dusty old box. And they have these captions on, things like, you know, mother, sort of cubs eating mother, you know, or, you know, bear climbs on board, you know, ship. Really, really weird. And of course, you look at these things and they deliver on the promise of the caption, but at the same time, immensely moving and pathetic, you know. So we were very privileged to be able to publish these for the first time in the publication that we did, the Nanok publication. So that was something, because of course, although every story, every provenance we picked up from these bears was different, and that was the important thing, you know, that we were in a sense discovering difference, that there wasn't a story that went with all of them. Images like this, and particular stories about this, like long, like convoluted, difficult stories about how a particular polar bear was killed, for instance, and shot, and how it kept lunging towards the camp, and they kept shooting, and it took 11 musket balls to kill this thing, and it broke its leg, and it still kept charging. So these particular things, of course, helps inform all the stories, in some senses, imaginatively, you know, because there were a set of stories like this is always going to be fragmentary anyway. But what you start then getting is this kind of collective, sort of this compound effect of all these stories. So they inform each other, but in a much more particular way. So that was the principle of what we were doing there. How are we doing for time? Oh, is it coming up for an hour? Okay. So I'll read a little bit here. There's tacit acknowledgement that much contemporary art functions laterally across the specialist disciplines of others, drawing on their methodologies and putting them and their knowledge to other new work, thereby simultaneously referencing, realigning, and subverting such knowledge. This process, in principle familiar to artists and art historians as détournement, mobilizes such non-art practices and models, for example, those in science or commerce. In the service of art, and is at once both mindful and subversive of these borrowed methodologies. Similarly, during, again, this is a De Boer reference. Similarly, during the development of NANOC, amongst the institutions and individuals with whom participation and to some extent collaboration was crucial, there numbered museums, keepers of collections, taxidermists, artists, hunters, anthropologists, art academics, and the public. So, the exhibition of photographs, the archive of photographs, and don't forget, it was very important that the photographs were not just photographs, but photographs actually fused with each photograph had an individual provenance as part of the work. Okay. So that collection of photographs, of which there are 33 in total, travelled all over to a lot of museums, a lot of museum collections, and art venues in Europe for about 10 years. It was a well-travelled show. From Faroe Islands, it was in Iceland, it was in Sweden, Norway, a lot of venues in the UK, the Natural History Museum as part of Oxford University, which is where they are here. And so one of the jobs it had to do was, as Bryndis said earlier, to interrogate the collections within which it appeared, and the specimens which constituted those collections. Interesting. I mean, we've been talking about this. I guess I framed it earlier on when I introduced this as we were talking about the Anthropocene, talking about global warming, talking about environmental crisis and so on. And in a sense, that is something that we've thought about a lot. And I suppose all our projects, and here you're seeing a very, very kind of a small part of what we do, but they all point to weird human behavior. It's not really about animals, of course, at all. It's about complex, changing attitudes, but also weirdness in any kind of particularly contemporary you would want to sort of identify, and how those contradictions, paradoxes of behavior sort of sit together or interspersed or entangled. Having said that, obviously our whole approach to NANOC in 2006, when the show went to the Horniman Museum in London, was much more complex. But an interesting thing happened between us starting the project in about 2000 and showing the Spike Island iteration, that the polar bear suddenly became this sort of big sort of environmental icon. You know, it became this icon for environmental degradation and threat. So it was a big shift in a very, very small number of years. And so when it hit the Horniman, it got national press all over the place, and everyone was picking up on its kind of significance as an exhibition which referenced or addressed environmental crisis. So in a sense, all the sort of subtlety, all the complexity that we were dealing with, it was kind of hijacked. So it's interesting that artists can hijack stuff, you know, but it's interesting here that our project was hijacked, you know, by an environmental kind of initiative or environmental contextualization. So that's okay, you know, because it was definitely a component of the work, but that was an interesting thing to observe. We showed the work in lots of different ways. So here it was shown as a block with a few missing. It's been to the States, been shown in various places in the States. And then it's also featured in a lot of publications and so on, where people have picked up on it, and you know, its value has been registered in different ways by different people, writing from different disciplines, which for us is that's kind of really important, because it's not art about art, talking to artists. You know, it's the idea that art intersects with the world and actually has an effect, actually matters somewhere else, you know, beyond the kind of the specific field of art. It's very important to us also that it does figure within and resonate within an art context as well. But the fact that it's doing this other thing is very important, as you'd expect from what I'm saying. Giovanni wrote, Snæbjörnsdóttir and Wilson have developed an international reputation for the creation of conceptual works of art that simultaneously embody the core and transcend the boundaries of human-animal studies, strictly academic discourse, in order to communicate to wider audiences. So yeah, we hung out with those animal studies guys in 2007, 2008, and still do to this day, in some instances, made some great friends there. But, in a sense, that was only one sort of dimension of what we were doing. So it's, I think that's the most interesting thing about what it is, that it's like it's different collaborations with different groups of people, different disciplines, different fields, but also different resonances. We were asked in 2008 to, if we would do the Nanook thing again, like the installation again, in Australia. I mean, that's a really strange request, because you would not expect there to be many polar bears in Australia. So we said no, obviously. But then we thought about it a bit and thought, well, okay, what? It's so bizarre. We should just follow it up maybe and see what happens. So we said, okay, well, you're not giving us enough time to do this at all. It took 4 years to do the last one, so whatever it was, 9 months is not going to be enough. So you can do all the research, right? And if it looks good, we'll process it and we'll make a show. And so this research began to come in. They got their researchers on it, and unlike in the UK, where all the polar bear specimens the majority had come to the UK over a period of 150, 200, well, over 200 years. The majority of the specimens that were found in Australia during that very short time of research had come to the shores of Australia over the previous 30 years. Basically, people had gone up and so basically trophy hunting, going up, buying a license to kill a bear, shooting it, like $25,000, something like that, and then going up, shooting it, bringing it back and having it stuffed. So it's a very, very different dynamic going on, mostly for private collections. So anyway, we did this thing, and it was a very different project, but it was interesting, that we were doing it elsewhere, and in something that obviously a part of the world that was very much an erstwhile British colony. And so again, it sort of complicates the thing, again, the whole dynamic and the whole sort of layering of that history. And in this particular exhibition we had, it was actually a group exhibition, so it really wasn't, there was none of the sort of ambitious scope possible in that way either. But one of the things that we did do was to actually have a chalkboard where we were as information was coming in during the show, we were writing down new information and so on. So it became a sort of building up, and then we would have photocopies which we'd bang onto the wall next to the chalk text and so on. And so it was a dynamic work where the research again was evident as part of the project. Very much ongoing. Okay. And it sort of had spin-offs and so on. This was in Larson's Lost Water, which was at Wimbledon School of Art. And that was again a group show, which is interesting. Anyway, so we got on with doing other things. We're doing a lot of other projects and so on. But what we thought we'd do is just show you now just a couple of more recent projects that, in a sense, carry that idea, or the idea of our relationship to the Arctic and the complexities going on there in terms of... And then it gets dead environmental in the sense, because we know about the sort of fragile environment of the Arctic. And so it is a very powerful place to work with. In 2010, we went up to Svalbard. We had a Arts Council grant, travel grant to go up there, and we were doing some research up there, talking to some scientists who, there's a lot of polar research going on there. Svalbard is an international, it's a province of Norway, but it is actually not owned by Norway. Okay, so it's an international site for research. This was up in Pyramiden. I just show this because it's just a really great place to think about. Pyramiden, which is this lost Russian mining town. I think there's 5. When we visited, there was 5 people still living there, and they're just looking after it, and maintaining a Russian foothold up in the Arctic. But anyway, this is just a signal that we were doing. We were trying to get somewhere with a project that we had in our minds about, which resisted the iconography of the polar bear, okay, as a thing, as an entity, as an instantly recognizable thing. And so we wanted to, how could we work with that? And we began to think about how we might find out about the polar bear dens, okay? Every polar bear den is unique. It doesn't really have an exteriority, it doesn't have any sort of visible, identifiable shape. It's all about the interiority, it's all about this potential, this site of this interior site, which is temporary, because when it melts, it all disappears. But it has the capacity to invoke this sort of sense of something portentous, something significant. Because, you know, when we're talking about how this icon has become this so-called poster child for environmental decline, how do you still talk about that without just simply sort of reiterating this, you know, this cliche? You know? So we started working with this idea of dens. We got nowhere, pretty much, although they were very helpful in some ways. But we were still at a bit of a loose end of how we were going to get anywhere, because they were very protective about, and quite understandably, about polar bear sites. If you went out of the town in Longyearbyen, you had to have a gun. If you had a gun, you'd have to be prepared to use it. And like, what would it be like? What kind of headline would that be? Like 2 artists, you know, shoot a polar bear in the Arctic, you know, whilst researching a polar bear problem. It's like, it's a bit stupid. So we were really uncomfortable about the whole thing, actually, but very happy to talk to scientists who were up there. And some of them, later in Tromsø, when we met up with them there, we arranged to let us have drawings and stuff. And they actually made some drawings of polar bear dens, which were measured. So we began to build up this series of plans for existing polar bear dens, which, of course, by the time we got them, probably didn't exist anymore. These temporary constructions. And it's really interesting because they were very complex, some of them were so simple. They were like an entrance and a chamber. Some of them had like 2 chambers or 3. And it got really, so there were some that were about 18 meters long and had multiple chambers. And so, as I say, we were interested in the unique quality of these constructions and how also they functioned ergonomically there in terms of maintaining a certain temperature. The polar bears would actually enact certain behaviours in order to reduce the temperature or actually increase the temperature, you know, by manipulating snow. So it became a really interesting subject. And I think it was the enigma of it that we were interested in. So here you see one of the results of that. This is a polar bear den. It's about, I think it's about 1/10 scale, or something like that. And we made a series of these maquettes. The particular ones that we ended up with working came as a consequence of picking up an invitation that we received when we were doing a talk in Nevada at it's a big conference that happens every 5 years, I think. It's an art and environment conference. And we talked about this project that was going sort of nowhere, but it was really fascinating. And the director of the museum in Anchorage came up to us at the end of our talk and said, "We want you to finish the project with us," which is great. So we then went to Alaska shortly after that and began this research. We're still up there. We're doing a residency up there, and so we've been working on that now for 3 years. I think we've been to Alaska 3 or 4 times. And we just came back a couple of weeks ago. I guess it hinges on, like the matrix of the title is the environment of multiple human and interspecific interests as they intersect in locations on the North Slope Borough. That's the northern coastline of Alaska. The matrix, these interests, amongst others, include those of the Inupiaq communities, the oil industry, polar bears in their denning activities and behaviour, conservation and tourism. Principally, those are the different communities that are actually constituting this contested field, or this. And of course, all those different communities, they're not all in consensus individually. Never mind, sort of collectively. So this is a guy called Craig Pearham, who used to work for US Fish and Wildlife. He now works for another environmental organisation. See, these are some of his research. This is them going to visit dens and stuff after the snow's melted. And, there's a lot more to this, which probably time isn't going to allow. But these are the drawings that we were working from. We made 3D visualizations of these, and then consequently made, or subsequently made the glass maquettes. We worked with the National Museum of National Glass Centre in Sunderland. Worked with some amazing guys there who are doing lamp work, and it's a kind of dying art in a way. And so they were. We were standing over them, and they were saying we were just getting it as close as we could to the visualizations that we'd managed to make from these dens. And then when we showed them on plinths, so they were this high, and they were transparent or frosted glass screens on top, filling the whole top surface of the plinth. And they were back projected onto that with these what they call FLIR. These are forward-looking infrared images, where the technology of the oil industry is using this scanning technique, or rather their technology has been used by the conservationists or the biologists working up there. To identify where polar bear dens are being dug. If they are found to be within a mile of a proposed ice road, as winter comes on, they'll have to divert the whole ice road. So it's a really interesting thing. The technology belongs to the oil industry, but the oil industry is having to spend millions of dollars diverting roads once one of these dens is found. Okay, so it's a very, very delicate, fragile relationship, as you can imagine. This is kind of typical of what you would see. Although the event that happens in this one isn't absolutely typical, because the idea is not to find a polar bear, it's just to find where the dens are. Okay. This time, on this occasion, they actually disturb the bear, sorry.
I'm pretty sure. Well, you see the 2 years in the
So they get very excited about that. But that's not the purpose of what they're supposed to be doing. So, and the ones that we included, when we had the maquettes sitting on top of these films, were just simply searches. It was about looking for something, and that was kind of quite important. Not about, and it was about finding dens, but which were probably occupied, but not about finding or disturbing the bear. Okay, so how are we doing for time now? 1 hour, quarter of an hour. It'd be nice to have some questions at some point. So they looked like this. So this is a very brief thing, but and it was really nice the way the light refracted up through the den. And you hear these little crackly voices going on as they're sort of searching for these things and navigating the snowy terrain. Okay, Bryndis, do you want to talk about this one?
No, maybe we need to wrap this up.
We don't. We've got 2 hours.
No.
Is everyone okay?
No. Okay, I just
This is virtually the last project.
Yeah, I just want to, because we just come back to this work quite a bit, and I guess it's kind of stayed with us, the project, because it's constantly, there's a nano project, is constantly being brought up to us through various places where it's coming up now in different kind of professions and discourses. But this is actually in Iceland, and this is just relating to a work that we've just recently done, and is in Anchorage Museum now. And I was actually in Iceland. This is in 2008, and it's actually a polar bear that arrived in Iceland. And in Iceland, more so, polar bears arrive there now. And this is, of course. They used to arrive in Iceland before, but then they came on ice. But now they're swimming over, and they arrive very hungry and in a terrible state. And they've many been swimming for days. Although the shortest path between Greenland and Iceland, the northwest coast of Iceland, is only about 200 kilometers. It still takes them over a week to swim over there. But this one was actually on this particular bear that came there, and I want to give us some room for questions, so I'm going to kind of cut this short. But basically, as with all polar bears that arrive in Iceland, they are shot. But with this one, they intended, or they said they were going to try and capture it, and there was this kind of big thing. A lot of people turned up there. They flew over. A specialist from Copenhagen Zoo that was supposed to anesthetize the bear. They flew in a cage from Denmark, was supposed to be able to hold the bear and everything. But as it turned out, because I was there myself, they actually shot it in the back when it was running to the sea. We can, if we have time for questions, we can talk a little bit more about this. But the arrow is just, it was so, we were kept away so much, so you can basically, I didn't have a big lens, so you can see this arrow and this white little blob. That's the polar bear, and there was a kind of big thing. The Minister of the Environment was there, and there was it was a very weird, like with so many of these things that we've kind of now discovering when we put ourselves into these situations. It's really sort of quite complicated. There was all these discussions. I could hear there was. Debates going on if they were to capture the polar bear, what were they going to do with it? They maintained they weren't going to put it in a zoo. They maintained they were going to release it back into the wild. This is just before Iceland actually economically crashed, and so all ideas about what they could do, were kind of like right there out in the air. So what they couldn't really agree on was the thing, they were just having this debate, but what is the polar bear? How do we know it's come from Greenland? It might have come from Svalbard, which is in Norway, and if it's come from there, it has different bacteria than it would have come from Denmark, so we can't put a Norwegian polar bear back into Danish Greenland. So it was just all these border questions and all these kind of strange things that were also surrounding this as well. But we found out that, there were two bears that arrived that summer in Iceland, and they were both shot. And they did all these researches on the bears, and all of this is, we found out the scientist who does these research is responsible for all polar bear scientific research in Iceland. He's also been pioneering a method which goes beyond what some are developing. Is like they say that they can determine the age of the animal from the tooth samples that they take, but he takes it. This scientist, he takes this further. He looks at the lines and he reads the lines, and so he will actually has his own theories about that. In these lines, he can say if it's a female bear, if it has been having cubs, and how many cubs, and how often that has happened, and so he can actually draw out a certain kind of biography of the bear from these lines. Also, if they are thin or thick, he will maintain that they reference if it's been a good year for food or not, and so forth. And these are these kind of samples that he uses, and he of course uses his microscopes to kind of read into them. But we got permission to take these. Have these samples. He actually lent them to us, and we went into a microscope with a camera and photographed them in many sections, and then we arranged them together just like a collage, and then printed them up really large. They're like our human size, and then we got his help to identify all these different things, the different years within the tooth sample, and then we looked up all the different kind of what we could find through our research, what was happening at this kind of same year. So we know the year the polar bear died, we know how old it was, so we're basically tracking back and just looking at all the different kind of climate regulations and laws that we've been putting in effect on these different years. And through that you kind of just kind of see this we just endlessly saying we're doing something, but then we sort of go back to point one and we start again, But we sort of connected that to that year of the living year of those bears. And at the bottom we had these images of these, because we're kind of interested and we're beginning a project which we don't quite know where we're going to go with this, but just thinking about the relationship between landscape and this kind of animal, and these animal arrivals, i.e. the polar bears in Iceland, and the kind of landscapes that they come to, and if there is a kind of connection between the two. And this is just from how it was. It's in this exhibition in Anchorage Museum currently, and we call this work "Shooting the Messenger." And I think that's just one. This slide, and then we just. I think Mark, you want to finish here, but this is just our end. We just actually come from Alaska. We went up to Barter Island, Kaktovik. With the support of Anchorage Museum, and this town is interesting for or village interesting for many reasons. There's only about 300 people living there. We went there with an Inupiaq artist, so we were sort of like her guests into that village, and it's just like an incredible experience. I mean, I don't even know how we are going to process all these things that we went through in this visit, but this is just looking through our window, and this is a film that we made, and you can't see the animal in there, and you know, you can also see in the film a lot of the wind and the sea and things sort of happening around it sort of environmentally. But this town, first of all, it's sinking. Yeah. Secondly, Trump has opened up the nature reserve through legislation, so now it's okay to drill for oil around there. So the village is all up in arms. There's not like everyone doesn't want that. A lot of people want it, and they're just like fighting over whether to have oil drilling or not oil drilling, whether to have it on land, whether to have it on sea. They hunt whales, which is part of their Inupiaq tradition, and in recent years, the last kind of 10-15 years, polar bears have been flocking to this village, and so they have like up to 70-100 polar bears, you know, that come there, and they live off these whale carcasses that they hunt. But because of the tourists now flocking also to the village to see the polar bears eating of the whale carcasses, the village is also up in arms over that. So they decided to take the whale bones. Well, part of the community, the whale captains, decided to take the whale bones and drag them from the village into the native land. And the native land is a land that tourists and people are not. You cannot go there without the permission. So basically, everything is happening in this town at this time, and we felt incredibly privileged being able to sort of be in there with our research, even taking up your camera to photograph something like this. You were incredibly aware of what you were doing, because they're just so tense about any visits or any kind of interference with their life, which is our livelihood, which is very quickly disappearing. I don't know, do you want to add something to this and close it off?
No, that's great. I'll just wrap it up. Yeah, I'll just start right there.
Yeah, I don't know. I think we're ready now.
Okay. So this will leave us half an hour for questions. So yeah, excuse the shaking. This is just like something we shot, and then so there are some things that we may use this, but not the shaky bit. Whilst the validity of experience is not and never was contingent upon the production of a verifying image, in a law of diminishing returns, while the binge-like and competitive trading of image escalates, in this context it is so much more than a diversion. It is part of the virus that drives the demand and threatens to unravel an ever-increasingly unattainable prize. So we write about this in relation to the idea of eco-tourism is an interesting, almost oxymoronic thing. So we riff on that a little bit, and then we wonder, should we then be demanding a new kind of technology, one that allows us to register, weigh and fathom relationships rather than their isolated, individualized components? Does such a technology exist already? It's not too much, we believe, to propose that art, in fact, both what art has already and may yet still become, might be such a technology, albeit one that is bound up with the currency of imagination and poetics. There will be others. Art, though, allows the weighing together of multiple fields, events, phenomena, material methods, and their constitutive relationships, without ever pretending to provide the last word on their scope or limits. In the speculation of art, what is presented is just such an instrument, amongst many possible related instruments, by which to read a set of intersections and effects. As artists, we continue to explore engaging and compelling ways of demonstrating complexity, of raising curiosity in respect of issues that must increasingly preoccupy us all if we are to effect any turnaround in how we deal with our precarious environmental condition and the now inevitably catastrophic times ahead. And on that happy note, we'll conclude.
Okay.